3 years. That's how long it took Daniel to feel normal again. Well, maybe not completely normal, but good enough to want to step outside his comfort zone. Good enough to think about helping others the way people had helped him. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror that Tuesday morning, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. It had been ages since he'd worn anything this formal. The dark blue suit was borrowed from his brother, and honestly, it fit pretty well. Daniel smiled at his reflection, then looked down at the golden retriever sitting patiently by his feet. "What do you think, buddy? Do I look okay?" The dog's tail wagged, and Daniel felt a little bit of his nervousness fade away. This dog, this four-legged friend named Cooper, had changed everything. Before Cooper came into his life, Daniel barely left his apartment. The nightmares were too real. The sudden noises made him jump. Crowds felt like threats. Even grocery shopping became an impossible task. But Cooper was different. Cooper knew when the panic was coming before Daniel did. The dog would press against his legs, giving him something real to focus on. Something to ground him. Cooper had given him his life back, piece by piece. Today was supposed to be special. Daniel had applied to volunteer at the community center downtown. They were organizing a big charity event, and he wanted to be part of something good. Something meaningful. After everything he'd been through, after all the dark days, he wanted to give back. He grabbed the envelope from his kitchen counter. Inside was his volunteer application, all filled out and ready to go. He'd spent hours on it, making sure every detail was perfect. This mattered to him more than he could explain. "All right, Cooper, let's do this." The drive to the community center took 20 minutes. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel a bit too tight. His brother had told him to relax, that everything would be fine. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one walking into a building full of strangers. The community center was bigger than Daniel expected. It was one of those old buildings that looked important, with tall columns out front and perfectly trimmed bushes lining the walkway. A banner hung above the entrance announcing the charity gala. People were already moving in and out, carrying boxes and decorations. Daniel parked his car and sat there for a moment, breathing slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Cooper shifted in the passenger seat, sensing his owner's tension. I know. We've got this." He clipped Cooper's leash on and stepped out of the car. The morning air was cool and crisp, typical for fall. Daniel loved this time of year. The leaves were turning orange and yellow, and there was that smell of autumn that made everything feel like a fresh start. As they walked toward the entrance, Daniel noticed Cooper's vest was sitting perfectly. The bright patches on both sides clearly said "Service Dog" in bold letters. They'd never had a problem before. Store managers always nodded and smiled. Restaurant staff knew the rules. Cooper was allowed everywhere Daniel went. That was the law. But something felt different as they approached the door. A woman stood at the entrance with a clipboard directing volunteers. She was probably in her 50s, wearing a blazer that looked expensive and a name tag that identified her as the volunteer coordinator. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she had that look of someone who took her job very seriously. Daniel walked up with what he hoped was a confident smile. "Good morning. I'm Daniel. I'm here to volunteer for the gala." The woman looked at him, then immediately looked down at Cooper. Her expression changed. It wasn't warm anymore. "I'm sorry, but we don't allow pets inside the building." Daniel's smile faded just a bit. He'd heard this before, usually from people who didn't know better. "No problem." He could explain. "Oh, Cooper isn't a pet. He's my service dog. See his vest? He's trained to help me with my disability." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand that, but we have a very strict policy here. No animals. It's for health and safety reasons." Daniel felt that familiar tightness starting in his chest. "Stay calm. Breathe. Ma'am, service dogs are protected by federal law, the ADA. They're allowed in all public places. I have documentation if you need to see it." He reached into his envelope and pulled out Cooper's certification papers. Everything was official, stamped and signed by Cooper's trainer. He'd carried these papers for 2 years and never needed them. Until now. The woman barely glanced at the documents. "These don't look official to me. Anyone can print something like this at home." Daniel's hand started to shake slightly. Other volunteers were beginning to notice. A few people slowed down to watch what was happening. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. "I promise you, these are legitimate. Cooper is a certified service animal. I'm a veteran and he helps me with PTSD. The law says I know what the law says, the woman interrupted, her voice getting louder. But I also know that this is private property, and I have the authority to determine who enters this building. Your paperwork doesn't look legitimate, and I can't risk the safety of our guests and volunteers. More people were stopping now. Daniel could feel their eyes on him. His breathing was getting faster. This was exactly the kind of situation that triggered his anxiety. Too many people. Too much attention. Conflict. Cooper pressed firmly against Daniel's leg, doing exactly what he was trained to do. But it wasn't enough this time. Please, Daniel said, and he hated how his voice sounded, weak, desperate. I just want to volunteer. I filled out all the forms. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. I'm sorry, but my decision is final. You'll have to leave the dog at home if you want to participate. Someone in the small crowd that had gathered muttered something about service dogs being allowed everywhere. Another person said they'd seen service dogs in the center before. But the coordinator wasn't budging. Daniel felt his vision getting blurry at the edges. The panic was coming and he couldn't stop it. Not here, not in front of all these people. He needed to leave. He needed air. Okay. I understand, he managed to say, even though he didn't understand at all. He turned around, Cooper immediately matching his pace. They walked away from the entrance, away from the staring crowd, away from the woman who had just crushed something fragile inside him. There was a bench near the parking lot, half hidden by some bushes. Daniel made it there and sat down heavily. His hands were shaking. His chest felt tight. Cooper climbed onto the bench beside him, something he wasn't usually allowed to do, but the dog knew this was an emergency. Daniel buried his face in Cooper's fur and focused on breathing. Just breathing. The dog's warmth was solid and real. After a few minutes, the worst of it passed. He sat there, staring at nothing, wondering why he'd even tried. This was why he didn't go places. This was why he stayed home. People didn't understand. They didn't care. All his preparation, all his hope. And it ended like this. The envelope with his volunteer application sat beside him on the bench. Useless now. What Daniel didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire thing. Someone who wasn't going to let this slide. Someone who, in just a few minutes, was about to change everything. But right now, sitting on that bench with his service dog pressed against him, Daniel just felt defeated. He'd served his country. He'd fought through darkness and found his way back to wanting to live again. And this morning he'd been told he wasn't good enough, that his papers weren't real, that he didn't belong. It hurt more than he wanted to admit. Cooper licked his hand and Daniel managed a weak smile. At least he still had this friend. At least he wasn't completely alone. He had no idea that what was about to happen next would not only change his day, but would spark something much bigger than he could possibly imagine. Rebecca had arrived at the community center 15 minutes early, like she always did. Being punctual was just part of who she was. As one of the center's biggest supporters and a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases, she believed in their mission. Or at least she thought she did. She'd parked her car in her usual spot, the one under the big oak tree that provided shade. Her speech for tonight's gala was already prepared, sitting in her bag. She'd practiced it 3 times that morning. Everything was ready. She just needed a few quiet minutes to review her notes one more time before heading inside. That's when she noticed the commotion at the entrance. Through her windshield, she could see a young man standing at the door with a dog. Even from this distance, she could see the service dog vest clearly. The bright patches were visible in the morning sunlight. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she could read body language. She'd spent 20 years in courtrooms learning to read people. The coordinator, Patricia something, Rebecca couldn't remember her last name, was shaking her head. The young man was holding out papers. Patricia barely looked at them. More people started gathering around, watching the scene unfold like it was some kind of show. Rebecca felt her jaw tighten. She knew exactly what was happening. She'd seen it too many times before. Someone with a disability trying to exercise their legal rights, and someone else with just enough authority to make their life difficult. The young man turned and walked away. Even from her car, Rebecca could see the defeat in his shoulders. The way his head hung down, the dog stayed close to his side, protective and alert. They made their way to a bench partially hidden by bushes, and the man sat down like someone had cut his strings. Rebecca sat in her car for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She was angry. Really angry. But anger without strategy was just noise. She'd learned that lesson early in her career. If she was going to do something about this, she needed to do it right. She pulled out her phone and made the first call. Tom, her firm's investigator, picked up on the second ring. Tom, I need you to do something for me. Fast. She explained what she'd just witnessed and gave him the details. Tom had worked with her for 12 years. He knew when she was serious, and he knew not to ask unnecessary questions. He'd start pulling together everything they might need. The second call was to her old college roommate Lisa, who worked as a producer at the local news station. Lisa owed her a favor. Actually, Lisa owed her several favors. This seemed like a good time to collect. Lisa, remember how you said if I ever had a story you needed to hear about it? Well, I've got one, and it's happening right now. Lisa was interested immediately. Disability discrimination at a prominent community center during their big charity event? With witnesses everywhere? Oh yes, this was exactly the kind of story that needed to be told. The third call was the most important one. James Hamilton, the grandson of the woman who'd founded this center 60 years ago. James sat on the board, and he took his grandmother's legacy seriously. Very seriously. James, it's Rebecca. We have a problem. A big one, and it's happening at the center right now. She explained everything she'd witnessed. James's voice went cold in that particular way that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. Rebecca told him to make it 15. 3 calls. 3 minutes. Now it was time for the direct approach. Rebecca stepped out of her car and walked straight toward the bench where the young man sat. Up close, she could see he was maybe late 20s, early 30s. The dog was beautiful, well-groomed, clearly well-trained. The service vest wasn't some cheap knockoff bought online. This was legitimate. Excuse me, she said gently, not wanting to startle him. My name is Rebecca Chen. I'm an attorney and I saw what just happened at the entrance. The young man looked up at her, his eyes red. It's fine. I shouldn't have expected anything different. No, it's not fine, Rebecca said, sitting down on the bench but keeping a respectful distance. What just happened was illegal, and I'd like to help you, if you'll let me. The young man studied her face, probably trying to figure out if this was real, or if she was about to disappoint him too. His hand rested on the dog's head, a gesture that seemed automatic. I'm Daniel, he said finally. This is Cooper. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Cooper. Rebecca smiled at the dog, who wagged his tail once. Daniel, I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to show me your documentation? And would you let me take some photos of it? I promise you I'm going to make this right. Daniel hesitated. She didn't blame him. Some stranger walks up and asks for his personal information, but something in Rebecca's voice must have convinced him, because he pulled out the envelope and handed over Cooper's certification papers. Rebecca examined them carefully. Everything was legitimate. Official stamps, proper signatures, certification numbers that could be verified. This wasn't someone trying to pass off their pet as a service animal. This was the real deal. May I take photos? She asked again, wanting his explicit permission for everything. Daniel nodded. Rebecca pulled out her phone and carefully photographed each document, making sure every detail was visible. Then she stood up and looked Daniel directly in the eyes. I need you to stay right here. Don't leave. Don't go home. Can you do that for me? Why? What are you going to do? Rebecca's expression hardened in a way that had made opposing lawyers nervous for 2 decades. I'm going to fix this. You were denied access to a public accommodation because of your disability. That's a federal civil rights violation, and the person who did it is about to learn a very expensive lesson. Daniel looked uncertain, but he nodded. Okay, I'll wait. Good. This won't take long. Rebecca turned and walked toward the entrance with the kind of purpose that made people step aside. She wasn't running. She wasn't rushing. But everyone who saw her coming knew she meant business. Inside her head, she was already building the case. Witnesses everywhere. Clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Legitimate service animal with proper documentation. A veteran. Which made it even worse from a public relations standpoint. And Patricia, whatever her last name was, had made it personal by questioning the validity of official documents. Oh yes. This was going to be handled. Today. Right now. As Rebecca approached the entrance, she noticed Patricia had put up a handwritten sign. No animals allowed. The sign hadn't been there before, So Patricia was trying to cover herself retroactively. That was just stupid. That made everything worse. Rebecca pulled out her phone and took a photo of the sign. Evidence. Always collect evidence. She walked through the doors like she owned the place. Technically, given how much money she'd donated over the years, she kind of did. The lobby was busy with volunteers setting up for the evening's event. Tables being arranged, decorations being hung, people rushing around with clipboards and worried expressions. Patricia was in the middle of it all, directing people, checking things off her list. She looked pleased with herself. That was about to change. "Patricia," Rebecca called out, her voice cutting through the noise. Patricia turned and her face lit up when she saw who it was. "Rebecca, Dr. Chen. How wonderful to see you early. We're so excited for your speech tonight. The setup is coming along beautifully and we need to talk now." The tone stopped Patricia mid-sentence. Her smile flickered like a candle in the wind. "Is something wrong?" "You just violated federal law," Rebecca said simply. "I watched you deny entry to a man with a legitimate service animal. I have his documentation. I have photos. I have witnesses. And I've already made some calls." The color drained from Patricia's face. Around them, volunteers stopped what they were doing. This was more interesting than hanging decorations. Patricia tried to recover. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I have the authority to make decisions about who enters this facility. Not when those decisions break federal law, you don't." Rebecca stepped closer. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her voice was calm, steady, and absolutely certain. That was more intimidating than any amount of shouting. The Americans with Disabilities Act is very clear. Service animals must be permitted in all public accommodations. Period. There are no exceptions for your comfort, your policies, or your personal opinions about whether someone's paperwork looks official enough to you. I was just trying to protect our guests. From what? A certified service dog helping a veteran with PTSD? From a man who wanted to volunteer his time to help this community? Other people in the lobby were openly watching now. Someone had their phone out. Good. Let them record this. Let everyone see what was about to happen. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Patricia the photos. "This is his documentation. Every piece of it is legitimate and can be verified. You didn't even look at it properly before you denied him entry. You made a snap judgment, and that judgment was discriminatory and illegal." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She had no defense because there was no defense. "Here's what's going to happen," Rebecca continued. "You're going to walk outside, find Daniel, and apologize. A real apology, not some half-hearted excuse. Then you're going to personally escort him and his service dog inside and make sure he's treated with respect." I'm not finished," Rebecca said. "James Hamilton is on his way here right now. I've also contacted the media. This story is already moving forward. Your choice is simple. You can do the right thing immediately, or you can dig this hole deeper and face the consequences. You have 2 minutes to decide." Rebecca checked her watch and waited. Patricia stood there frozen, realizing that her morning had just gone completely sideways. The clock was ticking. Patricia stood there like a statue. 2 minutes suddenly felt like an eternity when your entire career was hanging in the balance. Rebecca didn't move, didn't blink, just waited with her arms crossed and that expression that said she'd seen this play out 1,000 times before. Around them, the lobby had gone completely silent. Volunteers pretended to be busy with decorations, but everyone was watching. Someone's phone was definitely recording. In today's world, everything ended up online eventually. Patricia's face cycled through about 15 different emotions in 30 seconds. Shock, anger, fear, more fear. She opened her mouth twice to say something, then closed it both times. What could she say? Rebecca had her cornered with facts, witnesses, and the law itself. Patricia started, her voice shaky. "I was just following what I thought was protocol." Following protocol would have been recognizing a service animal and allowing access, as required by federal law, Rebecca replied calmly. "What you did was create a barrier based on your own judgment, which you have no legal authority to do." A black luxury car pulled into the parking lot outside. Through the glass doors, everyone could see James Hamilton stepping out. He was in his 60s, silver hair, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But what really stood out was the expression on his face. He did not look happy. Patricia saw him too, and whatever small amount of color had returned to her face drained right back out. "That's James Hamilton," someone whispered to their neighbor, the founder's grandson. James walked through the doors with the kind of authority that came from having his family name on the building. His grandmother had started this center to serve the community, all of it, especially people who needed help most. He took that legacy seriously, very seriously. But he didn't come into the lobby. Rebecca caught his eye through the glass and gave him a small nod. James understood immediately. He turned and walked toward the bench where Daniel was sitting. Rebecca watched through the windows as James approached Daniel. She saw him extend his hand, saw them shake, saw James sit down on the bench and start talking. Even from here, she could see Daniel's confusion turning into surprise. "What's happening?" Patricia asked quietly, her coordinator voice completely gone. "What should have happened an hour ago?" Rebecca answered. "Someone with actual authority is treating that young man with the respect he deserves." Outside, James was still talking with Daniel. Cooper had warmed up to him, tail wagging. That was usually a good sign. Dogs knew things about people that humans took longer to figure out. After about 5 minutes, James stood up and gestured toward the building. Daniel hesitated, looking uncertain. James said something else, putting a hand on Daniel's shoulder in that fatherly way some older men had. Finally, Daniel nodded and stood up. They were coming inside. "Here's what's going to happen now," Rebecca said to Patricia, her voice low enough that only the coordinator could hear. "When they walk through that door, you're going to apologize. A real one. You're going to admit you were wrong, and then you're going to step aside and let Mr. Hamilton handle the rest. Understood?" Patricia nodded, looking like she might be sick. The doors opened. James walked in first, followed by Daniel and Cooper. The volunteers in the lobby started clapping. Slowly at first, then louder. Someone even cheered. Daniel looked overwhelmed, like he didn't know how to process what was happening. Patricia stepped forward, and for a second Rebecca thought she might actually run away instead. But she didn't. She stopped in front of Daniel, and for the first time that morning she actually looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw him as a person instead of a problem. "Mr. Thompson," she started, then paused. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. What I did was unfair and illegal, and you didn't deserve to be treated that way. I apologize." It wasn't the worst apology Rebecca had ever heard, but it wasn't great either. Still, it was something. Daniel stood there, clearly not sure how to respond. Cooper pressed against his leg, always aware of his owner's emotions. Okay. Thank you," Daniel said quietly. James stepped forward then, and his presence somehow made the whole room feel different. More official, more serious. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please?" His voice carried across the lobby without him having to shout. That was the kind of voice you got from years of running boardrooms and charity events. The volunteers all turned to face him. Even the ones up on ladders hanging decorations stopped what they were doing. "What happened here this morning was completely unacceptable," James said clearly. "This community center was founded by my grandmother with one simple mission: to serve everyone in this community. Everyone. No exceptions. No excuses." He paused, letting that sink in. "Mr. Thompson is a veteran who served our country. He came here this morning wanting to volunteer his time to help us. Instead of being welcomed, he was turned away. His service dog, Cooper, who is protected by federal law, was denied entry. This is not who we are. This is not what my grandmother built this place to be." Several people nodded. A few looked uncomfortable, probably feeling guilty they hadn't spoken up earlier when they saw what was happening. "Effective immediately. Patricia is suspended pending a full investigation into this incident," James continued. His voice wasn't angry, just firm. "We will be implementing comprehensive training for all staff and volunteers on disability rights, service animals, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. This will never happen again." Patricia's face went white. She'd expected consequences, but hearing them announced publicly in front of everyone made it real. She turned without a word and walked toward her office, her heels clicking on the marble floor. James turned to Daniel. "Mr. Thompson, I want to personally invite you to not only volunteer today, but to consider being part of our veteran outreach program. We need people like you, people who understand what veterans face when they come home, people who can help others the way you've clearly helped yourself." Daniel looked stunned. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," James smiled. "Let us make this right. Let us show you what this community center is really about. Rebecca watched from the side, satisfied. This was how justice should work. Quick, clear, and with real consequences. But more importantly, with real change. One of the volunteers, a woman probably in her 30s with paint on her hands from working on decorations, approached Daniel cautiously. Hey, I just wanted to say I'm sorry too. I saw what happened earlier, and I didn't speak up. I should have. That wasn't right. Another volunteer joined her. Same here. We were scared of Patricia. She runs everything around here and, well, she did run everything. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her. More people came over one by one, apologizing, thanking Daniel for his service, asking about Cooper. The mood in the lobby completely shifted from tense and awkward to something warmer. Something genuine. Cooper, for his part, was loving all the attention. His tail hadn't stopped wagging. Daniel's hand shook a little less when someone asked if they could pet the dog. Is it okay to pet a service dog? The person asked, which showed they'd at least learned something. You're supposed to ask first, which you just did. Daniel smiled. A real smile this time. Yeah, it's okay right now. He's not actively working. Rebecca pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to Lisa at the news station. The situation had resolved better than expected, but the story still needed to be told. Not for revenge, but to show how quickly things could be made right when the right people cared enough to act. James walked over to Rebecca, speaking quietly. Thank you for calling me. If you hadn't been here, someone needed to be, Rebecca replied simply. Your grandmother would have done the same thing. She would have done it louder, James laughed. But yes, she would have. We've got a lot of work to do. Policy reviews, training programs, oversight procedures. I don't want this to ever happen again, not just here but anywhere in our network. I can help with that, Rebecca offered. My firm has resources. We've done this kind of training before. They talked logistics for a few minutes while Daniel got settled in with the other volunteers. Someone brought him coffee. Someone else showed him the schedule for the day. Cooper got a bowl of water and claimed a sunny spot on the floor where he could keep an eye on Daniel. By noon, it was like Daniel had always been part of the team. He was helping arrange chairs, offering ideas for table placement, even making people laugh with stories about Cooper's training days. The morning's trauma hadn't disappeared, but it was fading into something else. Something that might actually turn out okay. Rebecca packed up her things and headed to her car. Her speech for tonight needed a few changes now. She had a better story to tell. A real one about how communities could choose to do better, about how one person speaking up could change everything. As she drove away, she looked in her rearview mirror. Through the glass doors of the community center, she could see Daniel surrounded by other volunteers, all of them working together. Cooper was right there beside him, exactly where he belonged. Sometimes justice happened in courtrooms after years of legal battles. But sometimes when the right people were paying attention, it happened in a single morning. Both mattered. Both counted. Rebecca smiled and turned up the radio. Today was turning out to be a good day after all. The gala that evening was nothing like Daniel expected. He'd spent the whole day helping set up, and honestly, it felt good. Really good. The other volunteers treated him like he'd always been part of the team. Cooper had become the unofficial mascot, getting pets and treats from everyone who walked by. But as the sun started setting and guests began arriving in their fancy dresses and suits, Daniel felt that familiar anxiety creeping back in. This was a lot of people, a lot of noise, a lot of everything. Cooper sensed it immediately and pressed closer to his leg. Good boy, always knew exactly what to do. You okay? One of the volunteers, an older guy named Frank who'd been cracking jokes all day, put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You look a little pale, just a lot of people, Daniel admitted. I'll be fine. You will be, Frank agreed. Because you've got the best wingman in the building. Besides, wait until you hear what James has planned. It's going to be good. Daniel had no idea what that meant, but he didn't have time to ask. James appeared from somewhere, looking even more polished than he had that morning. The man knew how to wear a tuxedo, that was for sure. Daniel, can I talk to you for a minute? Privately? They walked to a quiet corner away from the growing crowd. Cooper followed, his nails clicking on the marble floor. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can absolutely say no, James started. Tonight, I'm giving a speech to all our donors and community members. I'd like to tell them what happened this morning. Your story, but only if you're comfortable with it. Daniel's stomach dropped. You want to talk about what happened with Patricia? I want to talk about why disability rights matter, why service animals are protected by law, why we need to do better as a community. Your story illustrates all of that perfectly. But this is your story, Daniel, not mine. If you'd rather I didn't mention it, I won't. Daniel thought about it. Part of him wanted to forget the whole morning ever happened. But another part, a bigger part, knew that staying silent didn't help anyone. How many other veterans had been turned away from places? How many people with disabilities face this kind of thing every single day? Will you be respectful about it? Daniel asked. I don't want it to sound like some pity story. I'll be completely respectful. I promise. And if you want, you could even say a few words yourself. No pressure, but the offer's there. Daniel laughed, but it came out shaky. Me give a speech? In front of all these people? You served your country. You face things most of us can't even imagine. I think you can handle a microphone. Cooper wagged his tail like he was voting yes. Okay, Daniel heard himself say. Okay, you can tell the story and maybe I'll say something. If I don't completely chicken out. James smiled and shook his hand. You won't chicken out. I can tell. 2 hours later, Daniel was seriously reconsidering that decision. The ballroom was packed. Easily 200 people, maybe more. They'd had dinner, there'd been a silent auction, and now it was time for speeches. Daniel stood at the side of the stage, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Cooper sat beside him, calm as always. How did the dog stay so relaxed when Daniel felt like he might pass out? James took the stage, and the room quieted down. He had that effect on people. When James Hamilton talked, you listened. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight and for your continued support of the community center. Your generosity makes everything we do possible. The usual pleasantries. Daniel only half listened, too focused on trying to breathe normally. Tonight I want to talk to you about what this center really means. My grandmother founded this place 60 years ago with a simple vision: to serve everyone in our community. Not just some people, not just the easy cases, everyone. James paused, and Daniel saw him look directly at where he was standing. This morning, we failed that vision. A young veteran named Daniel Thompson came to our door wanting to volunteer. He brought his service dog, Cooper, who helps him manage PTSD from his military service, and our volunteer coordinator turned him away. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. She questioned his paperwork. She cited policies that don't override federal law. She made him feel unwelcome in a place that exists specifically to welcome people, and that is unacceptable. Some people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded in agreement. But here's the thing about mistakes. They give us the opportunity to do better. Daniel is here tonight not just as a volunteer, but as a reminder of why our work matters, why we need to constantly examine our practices, train our staff, and live up to the values we claim to represent. James gestured toward where Daniel stood. Daniel, would you come up here, please? This was it. No turning back now. Daniel's legs felt like jelly, but he started walking. Cooper stayed right with him, matching his pace perfectly. The crowd started clapping, which somehow made it worse and better at the same time. He climbed the 3 steps to the stage. The lights were bright. So many faces looking at him. His hand found Cooper's head, fingers buried in soft fur. Anchor. Ground. Breathe. James handed him the microphone, and for a second, Daniel just stared at it like it was something dangerous. You've got this, James whispered. Just talk to them like you're talking to friends. Right. Friends. 200 friends in fancy clothes, who all had more money than Daniel would probably see in his lifetime. Sure. No pressure. He raised the microphone, and his hand only shook a little. Hi, I'm Daniel. This is Cooper. Cooper's tail wagged at the sound of his name, and some people in the audience laughed. Good laugh. Warm laugh. That helped. I didn't expect to be up here tonight. This morning I just wanted to volunteer. I wanted to give back to my community. Because a lot of people helped me when I was struggling. When I came home from overseas, things were hard. Really hard. I didn't leave my apartment for months. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't be around people. Every loud noise felt like a threat. He could see people leaning forward, actually listening. Then I got Cooper. He's not just a pet. He's trained to recognize when I'm having a panic attack before I even realize it. He grounds me. He helps me live a normal life. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here right now. Daniel took a breath. Cooper pressed against his leg. What happened this morning hurt. I'm not going to lie about that. But what happened this afternoon gives me hope. Mr. Hamilton didn't make excuses. He didn't try to sweep it under the rug. He acknowledged the mistake and promised to fix it. That takes courage, and that's the kind of leadership we need more of. The applause was louder this time. Daniel felt his throat getting tight, but he pushed through. There are thousands of veterans like me who came home different than when they left. There are millions of people with disabilities who just want to live their lives, go to work, volunteer, be part of their communities. We're not asking for special treatment. We're just asking for the access that the law already guarantees us. Service dogs aren't pets. They're medical equipment. They're the difference between someone staying home isolated or being able to go outside and live. He looked down at Cooper, who looked back up at him with those calm, knowing eyes. This morning, I was ready to give up. Again. I thought, why do I keep trying? Why put myself out there when it just leads to rejection? But then someone stood up for me. Ms. Chen saw what happened, and she didn't just walk away. She did something about it. And that matters. That matters so much. Rebecca was in the audience, and she gave him a small nod. Daniel nodded back. So I guess what I'm saying is, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And if you see someone being denied their rights, don't just watch. Say something. Do something. You have no idea how much that can change someone's day or their life. The room erupted in applause. People stood up, a standing ovation. Daniel stood there overwhelmed, not quite believing this was real. Cooper wagged his tail, happy because Daniel was happy. James took the microphone back and announced something that made Daniel's jaw drop. They were creating a fund, the Daniel and Cooper Fund for veterans with service animals. Starting tonight, donations would go toward helping other veterans get trained service dogs and supporting businesses and organizations with proper disability access training. We're starting the fund with a $100,000 donation from the Hamilton Foundation, James announced. Who wants to match us? Hands went up around the room. 50,000 here, 25,000 there. In less than 10 minutes, they'd raised over $400,000. Daniel couldn't speak. Couldn't process it. This morning he'd been turned away at the door. Tonight there was a fund with his name on it that would help countless other veterans. As he left the stage, people came up to shake his hand to thank him for his service, to tell their own stories about family members with disabilities. One older woman hugged him and cried, saying her grandson had PTSD and she hadn't known service dogs could help. Frank found him in the crowd and threw an arm around his shoulder. Told you it was going to be good. Didn't expect you to bring down the house, though. Daniel laughed, really laughed, for the first time all day. Cooper barked once, like he was laughing too. The evening ended late, but Daniel didn't want to leave. This place that had rejected him that morning now felt like home. These people who'd been strangers were now friends. And tomorrow the real work would begin. He had no idea yet just how big this was going to get. 3 months later, Daniel stood in the same lobby where he'd been turned away, but everything was different now. The walls had new posters explaining disability rights. There were pamphlets about service animals at the front desk. And most importantly, every single staff member and volunteer had gone through comprehensive training. Patricia never came back. The investigation had ended with her resignation, and honestly, Daniel didn't think about her much anymore. He'd learned that holding on to anger just made his own life harder. She'd made a mistake, faced the consequences, and hopefully learned something from it. That was enough. What mattered now was what came next. Daniel, they're here, Frank called from the entrance. Channel 7 news van just pulled up. Daniel's stomach did that familiar flip, but it was different now. Not panic, just regular nervousness. The kind everyone felt before doing something important. Cooper sensed it anyway and pressed against his leg. 3 months later, and the dog still knew him better than anyone. The local news had covered the story the night of the gala, and it had blown up bigger than anyone expected. Not just local news, regional news, then national news. By the end of that first week, Daniel's story had been shared millions of times online. People from all over the country sent messages, shared their own experiences with discrimination, thanked him for speaking up. It was overwhelming at first. Daniel had never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to volunteer and live a quiet life. But Rebecca had helped him understand something important. His story wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been denied access, everyone who'd been made to feel less than, everyone who needed someone to show them it was worth fighting for their rights. The news crew came in with their cameras and equipment. The reporter, a woman named Catherine who'd actually covered the original story, greeted Daniel with a warm smile. "Ready for this?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Daniel replied. They were doing a follow-up story. 3 months after the incident, what had changed? Turned out a lot had changed. The community center had become a model for disability access. Other organizations were reaching out, asking for advice, wanting to implement similar training programs. Rebecca's law firm had developed a whole curriculum that was now being used across the state. But the biggest change was the fund. The Daniel and Cooper Fund had grown to over $800,000. With that money, they'd already helped 12 veterans get trained service dogs, 12 people who were now living fuller, more independent lives because of what happened that Tuesday morning. The interview took about an hour. Catherine asked good questions, the kind that actually mattered. Not just about what happened, but about why it mattered. About how Daniel felt now versus 3 months ago. About what he wanted people to take away from his story. "I want people to understand that disabilities aren't always visible," Daniel told her, Cooper's head resting on his knee. "You can't always tell just by looking at someone what they're dealing with. And service animals aren't just for people who are blind. They help with all kinds of disabilities. PTSD, anxiety, diabetes, seizures, so many things. What would you say to someone who's facing similar discrimination right now?" Catherine asked. Daniel thought about that for a moment. "I'd say don't give up. I know it's hard. I know it hurts. But there are people who will stand up for you. There are laws that protect you. And your story matters. What you're going through matters. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're asking for too much just by asking for your basic rights." After the interview, Catherine mentioned something that surprised him. "You know, we've gotten so many messages from people saying your story inspired them to finally get help. Veterans who were too proud or too scared to admit they needed support. Your openness about your PTSD, about how Cooper helps you, it's made a real difference." That hit Daniel harder than he expected. He'd been so focused on the disability rights aspect, on the legal side of things, that he hadn't really thought about that part, about veterans who might be suffering in silence because they were afraid to admit they needed help. The next week, James called Daniel into his office. The community center had a new position opening up, coordinator of veteran services. They wanted Daniel to take it. Not as a volunteer anymore, as actual staff. With a salary and benefits and everything. "We need someone who understands what veterans face," James explained. "Someone who can build programs that actually help. Someone who's been there." Daniel looked at Cooper, who was sprawled out on the fancy carpet in James's office like he owned the place. The dog had come so far from that nervous rescue who'd been paired with him 2 years ago. They'd both come so far. "I don't have a degree in social work or anything like that," Daniel said. "You have something better. You have lived experience. You have compassion. And you have the trust of the veteran community. That's worth more than any degree." Daniel took the job. It felt right. Like everything that had happened, all the pain and struggle had been leading to this. Over the next few months, he built programs from the ground up. Support groups for veterans with PTSD. Workshops on accessing benefits and services. Partnerships with organizations that trained service dogs. A buddy system that paired newly returned veterans with those who'd been home longer. The program grew fast. Faster than anyone expected. Word spread through the veteran community that there was a place that understood. A place that helped without judgment. A place where you could bring your service dog without anyone questioning your right to be there. Rebecca stayed involved too. She and Daniel had become real friends. She helped him navigate the legal aspects of the programs, made sure everything was compliant, and continued to advocate for disability rights at every level. She'd taken on several cases of disability discrimination since Daniel's story went public, and she won every single one. One afternoon, about 6 months after everything started, a young veteran named Chris showed up at the center. He was maybe 23, 24. He had a German Shepherd service dog named Luna, and he looked exactly like Daniel had looked that Tuesday morning. Nervous, hopeful, scared. He'd be turned away. Daniel met him at the entrance. "Personally, welcome," Daniel said, extending his hand. "I'm Daniel. This is Cooper. The two dogs sniffed each other, tails wagging. Chris shook Daniel's hand, his grip uncertain. I saw your story online, Chris said quietly, about what happened here. And then I saw all the stuff about your programs. I need help. I'm not doing great. Then you came to the right place, Daniel told him. Come on in. Let me show you around. As they walked through the lobby, past the posters about disability rights, past the volunteers who smiled and welcomed them, Chris looked around like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Everyone here is okay with Luna? He asked. Everyone here understands that Luna isn't a pet. She's your partner. She's helping you live your life. And that's not just okay, it's celebrated. Daniel watched Chris's shoulders relax, saw some of the tension leave his face. He remembered that feeling. That moment when you realize you're safe, you're welcome. You're not going to have to fight just to exist in this space. By the end of that first meeting, Chris had signed up for 3 different programs. He exchanged numbers with 2 other veterans. He even laughed at one of Frank's terrible jokes. After Chris left, Daniel sat in his office with Cooper at his feet and thought about how strange life was. 6 months ago, he'd been sitting on a bench outside this building, defeated and humiliated, wondering if he'd ever feel normal again. Now he had a job he loved. He was helping people every single day. He'd found a community that valued him, and most importantly, he'd learned that speaking up about injustice didn't just help him, it helped everyone who came after him. His phone buzzed, a text from James. Board meeting tomorrow. They want to expand the veteran programs, looking at opening similar centers in 3 other cities. Need your input, 3 other cities. 3 more places where veterans like him and Chris could get help, without fear of judgment or discrimination. 3 more places where service dogs would be welcomed and understood. Daniel replied with a thumbs up, then put his phone away. Cooper looked up at him with those calm, knowing eyes. We did good, didn't we, buddy? Daniel said, scratching behind Cooper's ears. Cooper's tail thumped against the floor. The story that started with a denial had turned into something bigger than Daniel ever imagined. It became about hope, about change, about the power of one person refusing to accept injustice and another person brave enough to stand up and say, "This is wrong." Not every story has a happy ending. Daniel knew that better than most. But this one did. Not because everything became perfect, but because people chose to do better. They chose to learn. They chose to change. And sometimes that's the most powerful kind of happy ending there is. Daniel looked at the photo on his desk. It was from the gala. Him at the microphone with Cooper by his side, taken right before he started speaking. James had it framed and given it to him as a gift. The inscription on the frame read, "The day one voice changed everything." But Daniel knew the truth. It wasn't just his voice. It was Rebecca's courage to confront injustice. It was James's willingness to take immediate action. It was every person who donated to the fund, every volunteer who learned about disability rights, every veteran who found the courage to ask for help. It was all of them, together, choosing to be better. And that was a story worth telling.